Welcome everybody. This is Gihan Pereira here, and this is my first public online presentation for the year, and it's all about being able to manage the unexpected. We've had 2 years of great chaos and disruption and change, and that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. So I want to share with you today some strategies some really practical things that will help you anticipate and deal with the unexpected. So I'm going to give you some scenarios, and we'll work through them, and you'll have some ideas of your own. You'll get ideas from other people. Some of these scenarios will never happen. Some of these might happen, but the whole idea, by definition, if they're unexpected, is that we actually don't know what's coming up in the future. So we have to be prepared to deal with whatever life and the world throws our way. For people who don't know me, my name's Gihan Pereira. I'm a business futurist. I work with lots of leaders and teams and organizations looking at the future. And people typically ask me for one of two things. So first of all, what are some of the trends? So what's the future hold for us? And the other thing is, especially in the last few years, how do we deal with an uncertain future, given that we actually don't know what's coming up in our future? These are some of the clients I've worked with at a leadership level, and I'm just sharing this to show you that it's true all around the world. It doesn't matter whether it's large organizations, small organizations, corporate, not-for-profit, local, multinational. Many people are facing the same sort of issues. And so today what I want to share are some really practical strategies that you can use, whatever the size of your organization and whatever your position in it. I think that most of this will be relevant, especially if you're a leader. But hey, look, nowadays I think that you're a leader, whether or not you have leader on your business card, on your job title, whether you've got the corner office or not. It doesn't matter. We all have to be leaders in this time of great change. So, my 3 standard rules of engagement for all my presentations. Firstly, I do want to give you some things to think about. So, do the best that you can to avoid distractions and interruptions for this 45 minutes that we've got together. And think a bit big here. I'm going to invite you to think broader than you would in your normal everyday operations, and then maybe you need to scale it back and step back from it when life takes over, but it's easier to do that than the other way around. The second thing is just be playful here. You've got this environment, this safe environment, where you get the chance to dive in, try some ideas, share some ideas that may be a little bit out there. I'm going to present some scenarios that may be a little bit challenging or a little bit interesting, and jump in, go all in and play. It'll be better for you and better for everybody else in the room as well. And the third thing is I want to give you some things that you can take away and put into action. So, as I said, today is about expecting the unexpected, and there's this idea called the butterfly effect, which I'm sure you've heard of, where a butterfly flapping its wings on one side of the world creates a tornado or a hurricane on the other side of the world. Now, this is not just some crazy new age idea about how everything's connected. There's some strong mathematics, chaos theory, that underpins this, and if 2020 and 2021 have taught us anything, it's that this butterfly effect is real, that sometimes we're going to be affected by things that seem a long way away and completely unrelated and disconnected from us. As an example, I wrote a blog post 2 years ago in February 2020, a few weeks before COVID really reached our shores in a big way. And I wrote this blog post with this idea, this hypothetical idea, what if offices were illegal? So if we had this radical change that offices were illegal, what would that mean for the workplace? And my reasoning was, well, offices have only been around for 200 years, so are they really necessary anymore? And then, of course, a few weeks after that, offices did become illegal, and we were thrust into having to manage that, and people scrambled for office workers to be able to work from home. So, they were the lucky ones. They were the ones who were able to work from a different workplace. There were so many others who didn't even have that option available to them. So that's an example of something that was completely unexpected at the time, but it turned into reality. And it just shows that we have to face a lot of uncertainty now. So just to start off with the interaction, let's start off with something really easy. And I've got a poll for you. So we're going to have a lot of these interactive things as we go through. So here's a poll. how well do you deal with uncertainty? Okay, and as you see, there are 4 options here. So the 4 options, and I'm going to ask you to rate yourself from 1 to 5 on each of those 4, is how well do you operate when you've got a certain future? How well do you operate when you've got an uncertain future? And then the same 2 questions for your team. So if you're a leader of a team, or even if you're a member of a team, how well do you think your team operates when the future's known, even if it's a challenging future? And how well do they operate when the future's uncertain? So this is what's happened now. So most people reckon that they operate better and they deal better with certainty, even challenging certainty, than uncertainty. It's interesting here. This is the first time that I've seen the poll where where people rate their team higher than themselves. So you can see here the first and the third question. The first question 3.4 for yourselves, and on average 3.8 for your team. But as you can see, in both cases, you rate yourself and your team operate worse or operate more poorly in uncertainty. And that's typically been the case when I've run this poll over the last few years. So let me show you the results, some sample results when I've run this poll over the last few years. So first of all, in the time before COVID, before all this uncertainty, this is for a leadership conference pre-COVID, and people rated themselves pretty highly. Again, they rated their team members not as highly, but you can see almost the same. And then after COVID hit and all this uncertainty hit, people became a bit more realistic because they'd experienced what it was like to live through uncertainty and try to lead in uncertainty. This is something in about August, September 2020, and this is something around about the same time. These are even senior leaders and directors at the Governance Institute who realized that they're not really great at operating in uncertainty. And look, that's not surprising. That is the case, and we've all realized that now. And you often hear people saying we're all in the same boat, and I don't think that's true. I think we're all in the same storm, but we're all navigating our own boats through that storm. So, and everyone's got a different boat that they're navigating through that storm. Okay, so just with that in mind, to start off with, and I really wanted to make the point that people operate differently in uncertainty, and everybody in your team, even if you think you know them really well, you don't really know what storm they're going through at the moment. Okay, so as we get on to these scenarios that I'm going to share with you, the one thing I would say, the one thing I'd recommend for you is to be a possibility thinker as we look at these scenarios, because I'm going to throw at you 3 or 4 scenarios, and I'm going to ask you to think about how you would operate if this scenario happened. And be a possibility thinker. This photo here is a photograph, a picture of one of Google's early self-driving cars. So Google was pretty new, was one of the innovators and pioneers in the self-driving car industry. And this is one of their early models. So this is about 9 years ago now. And at that time, many people hadn't even heard about self-driving vehicles, let alone been in one. And I used to take this photo around on my smartphone and show it to people and say, hey, look, what do you think of this idea that we'll have self-driving cars in the future? And I got different reactions. And interestingly, they were along a spectrum. So when I showed it to my niece, Abby, who's now 16, almost 17, she was about 7 or 8 at the time. And I showed this to her and she goes, oh, that's really cool. That's cute, because you can see it's kind of got like a little face on the front. It's like this cute little bubble. She'd never driven a car before, so she kind of loved the idea that there'd be these little vehicles would come along and pick up her friends and herself and take them to places. When I showed it to adults, the reaction was different, and often, not with everybody, but often it was the opposite reaction. It was, yes, but people will never want to give up driving. Yes, but self-driving cars will never be as safe as human drivers. Yes, but what if the car gets hacked and somebody kidnaps my kids while taking them to school? So they were always thinking of reasons why this wouldn't be a good idea. Whereas Abby, and I'm sure her friends, were on the other end of that spectrum and thinking, yes, and how good would this be, and what opportunities would this open up for us? So I'd like you to think, like, how, as you're looking at these scenarios, try to be more towards that yes and end of the spectrum. And look, if you're not quite there yet, that's okay. If you just go, that's interesting, tell me more, or let me listen, or let me find out more. That's okay as well. But that's what being a possibility thinker is. And that's really what I'd like you to do in the next sort of half an hour that we've got together. Okay, so let's jump into these scenarios. The first one is one that I mentioned already, but we'll look at a specific aspect of that. This idea of flexible work, and the idea that the workplace is changing and has changed as a result of COVID. So I mentioned this blog post that I wrote at the start of 2020. This is something that I've been pushing for a long time. It just became mainstream in 2020 because of COVID-19. But it doesn't have to be as radical as that. So the scenario I'm going to present to you was inspired by this book, Nudge, an excellent book by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. And Richard Thaler and Kat Sunstein wrote this book about how you can influence people without having to enforce or impose restrictions on them or regulations on them, but just nudging them in a certain direction. So one of the examples I said is that if you want people to donate their organs after they die, if you want them to be organ donors, they can tick a box on their driver's license to say whether they want to be a donor or not. And there are two ways you could set this up. One is you could say, tick this box if you want to donate your organs. And the other one is you could say, tick this box if you don't want to donate your organs. Okay, and governments have the choice to put one or the other. And if you have the box that says, tick if you don't want to donate your organs, you actually get more people who leave the box unticked, because it's a little bit more effort to tick the box and think about making the decision than to leave it unticked. So, opting out means that more people opt into organ donation. So it's a little bit of a nudge. So I'm going to give you a little nudge about the workplace, and I say, if this thing became mandatory in the future, what difference would this make in our world? Okay, so I'll give you the scenario first, and then I'll give you the chance to share your responses. We won't do it in the chat room. I'll show you this little bulletin board that I've set up for you to respond. Okay, so here's a scenario. So the scenario is you've got a contract, and your team members have got a contract for a certain number of work hours every week. And the way it currently works is that your work time starts when you walk into the office. What if we changed it? So your work hours started when you walk out of your front door. And that's it. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. What would you do? If legally it was mandatory that you started your contract hours, and your employees' contract hours started when when the commute started. Okay, Steve says live in Sydney but work in Perth. Interesting. Here's another one. I'll give you another one. What else would we do? Pay for people to work at community hubs. Okay, so these things like co-working spaces that are set up in various places. Would you pay your employees to the membership to join one of those co-working hubs, so they don't have to be stuck in their home all the time, but they could go and work somewhere, but it would be close by, maybe even walking distance, but it would reduce their commute time. Okay, let's see what's happening. How can this be mandatory equity? Yeah. Fantastic. This is great to see so many responses. Great if being paid hourly, maybe not so if you're paying salaries. Yeah, that's true. Adjust hiring policy based on proximity to office. Yeah. Let me give you another one. See another idea here. Opens up possibility to hire more overseas people. What I meant was there's an incentive to hire more overseas people internationally. Yeah, employ people with the shortest commute time. That is quite common, right? And that's that doesn't have to be people who are close to you. If you are insisting on commute time, that might be the case. John says, yeah, use more co-working spaces and online work. And somebody said, no change to us, those of us living regionally. Absolutely. And I think that's a positive thing, right? So an employer in a CBD has incentive now to hire people who live regionally, because it makes no difference to them, because they might be working from home anyway, or internationally. So that's what I mean by this. This changes the dynamic. It's not only about saying that we lose working hours, it opens up other possibilities as well. Yeah, and Kate's made a comment here. People have to work longer, and that is one of the things that's happened. So, for example, in 2020, especially when people were just getting used to working from home, mainstream for the first time, one of the consequences was people were working longer hours because they were still working their commute time, which previously was kind of lost time to the organization. They were working those extra hours as well. So that was a negative consequence of people working from home. Okay, fantastic. Great to see so many responses here. Kevin's made this comment here. Use Google Cars and people can work in the vehicle. That is going to be one of the consequences of having self-driving cars in the future, that your commute time, or actually it doesn't even have to be commute, that when you're in your car, you could be working because you don't have to keep your eye on the road. Yes, some people say no change. Sophie says, yeah, good headphones. Says Tar can make calls and network. Yeah, so that becomes useful commute time. Yeah, great. Okay, brilliant, everyone. I'm thrilled to see so many great responses here. Thank you so much for participating in that. Brilliant. Okay, so this is what we're going to do, right? We're going to have some scenarios like this. The next one, we won't use this bulletin board. We'll actually do a breakout session, and we'll do it on a different scenario. Someone says I wouldn't exercise as much. All right, let's continue. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So that's exactly what I'm looking for with these sort of scenarios. So what I want to do is kind of just get you thinking a little bit differently. So I don't think there's any danger of us having new regulations that say commute times going to be included as part of your working hours, but we're trying to expect the unexpected. So I'm throwing some unexpected scenarios at you. Okay, let's look at this next one. So this next one I'm calling crypto democracy. There's a lot of talk about cryptocurrency at the moment, and I'll give you a quick primer on it, a quick introduction to what cryptocurrency is. But what I also want to do is, there's a lot of conversation around talent and a digital future and having more decentralized organizations. And I'm combining that with this idea of cryptocurrency to come up with this idea, which is a completely hypothetical idea, but I'd like to present it to you as a thought experiment to have a conversation about what happens if this idea actually happens in real life. Okay, so to give it some foundation, there's some research that's been done by KPMG, and every year for the last few years they've run this thing called the Keeping Us Up at Night survey, and they survey Australian CEOs, and for the first time this year they've also included non-executive directors and emerging leaders, so they're basically Australian leaders, and they said, what are your biggest challenges for the year ahead? And the number one biggest challenge for this year, by the way, you can just Google the report and download it so you can find out what all of them are. But the number one biggest challenge this year was having digital savvy people. As you can see, it says, how do we keep, reward and upskill people who are ready for a more digitized future? Okay, so that's a challenge that we're trying to address here in this scenario that I'll paint for you. Okay, so to paint that scenario, let me tell you a little bit about cryptocurrency. And look, some people know what it is and how it works, but for those who don't, I reckon the easiest way I've found to describe it, think of it like frequent flyer points. So any cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Dogecoin, which started off as a bit of a joke but has become serious now, think of it as like this imaginary currency or this artificial currency. In this case, I'm talking about, let's say, Qantas frequent flyer points. So you've got, if you fly Qantas and you're a frequent flyer member, you get access to frequent flyer points. You have to do a lot of work to earn your points. You have to get in a plane, fly somewhere, and that's how you earn points. That's become even more difficult now. But once you earn those points, then you can do things with them. You can spend them, you can redeem them, you can buy stuff with them, you can use them for earning more points and so on. One thing that frequent flyer programs don't let you do is that those points aren't yours to trade with other people. So you can't sell your points to other people. But with cryptocurrency, you can. If you earn Bitcoin or buy Bitcoin, you can spend it, but you can also sell it and somebody else can buy it. You hope for a higher price than you paid for it. And the other thing that's a little bit different from a frequent flyer program is that with the frequent flyer program, it's managed, in this case, it's managed by Qantas. They've got a big database of everybody's points. They decide how points are earned, what you can spend them on, they have certain rules and when points expire. The big advantage of a cryptocurrency, or one of the biggest selling points, is that it's owned and managed by nobody. Okay, so I'm not arguing in favor or against cryptocurrencies. I'm just saying these are how they work. So they people mint these bitcoins, and you can earn them, you can spend them, you can trade them, and nobody owns or manages the whole Bitcoin empire. Okay, so that's kind of how they work. So let me give you this hypothetical situation, this scenario that, let's say, in a few months' time, every organization was mandated that you had to make decisions based on a cryptocurrency. And it's a cryptocurrency that you create yourself. So what you do is you allocate, you create this new cryptocurrency. Let's not use bitcoins, because bitcoins, to buy a bitcoin now costs you like $49,000. But you create your own currency. So I'd create a Gihan coin for all my people in my organization, including myself. And you allocate them to people in your team, to everybody in your organization or people in your team. And they're allocated based on juniority. Okay, so it's the opposite of seniority. So if you think about, say in Australia, retirement age is 67. So it's a number of years you've got to go to reach that retirement age. So for myself, I'm in my 50s. So I take 67 minus my age, and I only earn like between 10 and 15 Bitcoin. Or this Gihan coins. Somebody who's much younger, so my stepdaughter Abby, she doesn't work with me, she's a physio, but she's 22, 23. So let's say if she's 22, she gets 45 of these Gihan coins. Okay, so everything's allocated based on juniority, and I'm picking juniority because I'm thinking if we want people who are ready for a more digitized future, there's a pretty good chance that younger people have a lot of expertise and ability, because, like I'm in my 50s, which means that I've spent at least more than 30 years as an adult. So I'm really good. I've got 30 plus years of experience being successful in the past. Okay, so I know what it takes to be successful in the past. Does it mean I've got what it takes to be successful in the future? Possibly, but let's say your age and your youth works in your favor. Okay, so we're allocating coins to your team members based on their age, and the younger they are, the more coins they get. Then, when you're making an important decision in your team, in your organization, it's no longer the most senior person who chooses what decision is going to be made. There are a number of alternatives put forward, and people can vote by spending their Gihan coins, or whatever your coins are called, by putting money into a pot. And the decision, so it's like having let's say 3 or 4 jars, and everybody puts money into the jar that they support, and the one with the most coins, that's the decision that the team or the organization goes ahead with. And if that turns out to be a good decision, then all the money that's been put into the jars gets redistributed to the people who voted for that decision. Okay, now, I'm not saying this is a perfect system and there are ways to game the system, and that's not really what I'm looking at there. What I want to do is, if we have this hypothetical thought experiment, that we have the youngest people in the organization have more decision-making power. People vote on decisions based on the power that they've got, which are these coins that have been allocated to them. And good decisions are rewarded. And if you like, the people who don't vote for those good decisions, they're kind of penalized. They lose power over time. It's kind of the way that leadership works in the past, except in the past it was based on seniority, because the people who had more seniority and were older tended to be better placed to make good decisions. It's just the future, that the decisions you made in the future aren't necessarily what's going to be right in the past aren't going to be right for the future. And your expertise from the past isn't necessarily relevant for the future. So you're kind of making bets on future decisions, and you're going to be rewarded if those bets turn out to be correct. And younger people start off with more power. All right. So if that was going to be mandated as by law, every organization, public and private, had to operate that way, let's say in a few months' time, and what would you do? What would you do leading up to that time? And again, I invite you to be possibility thinkers. What would that mean for your organization, for your team, for your leadership, for the way that you bring up the young people in your organization, the way that you recruit, and the way that you decide what you're going to do with people who aren't going to have a lot of power because they're old, and maybe I'm dead wood in my organization, and maybe there are other people who just happen to have that status because they've always had it. So how would you deal with that? All right, so what we're going to do this time is we're going to move into groups, and I'm going to ask you to have a chat with the people around you. So, okay, so did anyone come up with some great ideas? You can unmute yourself if you want to share it out loud, or you can type it in the chat room. What came up in the conversation that you thought was interesting and is perhaps a possibility for you? You don't have to respond, and often when I leave it open, people don't, but if you do want to, feel free to do that. Share some idea that came up. It doesn't have to be your own idea.
I think there's within the group that there was a general feeling of this was a good idea, but I think you get a different perspective on it if you're the business owner as opposed to being an employee or a senior executive within an organization. The great thing about when I was employed in the corporate world was that I was playing around with somebody else's money. Yeah. It wasn't my money and my livelihood that was at stake, Yeah. So you make decisions differently if your livelihood and all your worldly savings are on the line.
Yeah, it certainly raises your level of responsibility for recruiting, onboarding, training, building judgment in your team members if they're the ones who have the power, right?
Yeah. So yeah, interesting. Leave it for somebody.
Yeah, thanks, John. Anyone else?
Hi, Gyan, it's Mubarak from India. How are you?
Hi, Mubarak.
I think in our team, we just discussed, and we all are sailing in the same boat. We just, the main cause of the concern is we think about the sustainability and how we, and predict the future value. That's the constraints we have discussed. And thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mubarak. And I think that's exactly right. And that's the point I was making earlier, that for all of us who've kind of got gray hair and wrinkles, I think we're pretty good at being like understanding the future based on our experience and wisdom and insights from the past. And I'm not diminishing any of that, just saying that that doesn't automatically make you fit for the future. And I think we shouldn't necessarily assume that just because we've got a lot of success about how to be successful, not a lot of knowledge about how to be successful in the past, doesn't mean that we shouldn't be, doesn't mean that we've all automatically can understand about, as you said, Mubarak, sustainability, adding value for the future. And kind of I've got this big idea that, what if young people know more about the future than we do? And I think that's true. If you just started with that as a thought experiment, what would that mean if that meant that we also gave younger people more responsibility and accountability and power in the future?
In our previous consultancy, I was the only owner. In our new consultancy, we're inviting people as they come to work with us consultants to become part of the company. And that's been my learning working with a team of consultants in 20 years, that not getting any younger, do I want them to take a level of responsibility or just wait for me?
So you're saying, Carol Ann, that you would rather that they defer to you?
Yeah, our original model was it was my company and everybody worked under contract to me.
Yeah.
They'd worked with me for a number of years. Our new model is that they will, by contribution, buy into the company if they work with us for a period of time.
Yeah.
Partly because we're not getting any younger and we'd actually like to try and replace ourselves to an extent, but also just the learning. That we, if we're somehow financially committed as well, we pay a little bit more attention to what decisions are being made.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Thanks, Carol Ann. Felicity says, good wake-up call about my 25 plus years of experience and success actually in the past. Yeah, and look, just for everybody else who, like I, have some grey hairs, don't let the boyish good looks fool you. I'm in my 50s, but I'm not in any way suggesting that our experience and expertise from the past doesn't have any value. I'm just saying it doesn't automatically have value for the future, and even the value that it has may be less than the value that younger people have. And David here has a great comment. The past is no guarantee for the future.
Yeah, and we talked a bit about sort of what it would be like if you were actually working inside an organisation like that. And we talked about you can sort of help promote knowledge for everyone by running surveys and forums to see what people think about issues. And the people with few Gihan coins could potentially take on some sort of a mentoring, coaching role for newbies, so they have someone to go and bounce things off, and they can see where mistakes have been made before, and just get the benefit of a rounded piece of information before they go spend their Gihan coin.
Yeah, brilliant. Do you think I should mint this new cryptocurrency?
Definitely, I think you're on a winner there.
Any last ones? Okay, fantastic. I love the conversation that we're having here. I had a couple of other scenarios up my sleeves, which we won't talk about today, but we might do that in a future presentation. So thanks everyone for contributing. And I just also want to make the point that even if this doesn't become mandatory, it doesn't mean that we can't move in this direction. So mentoring is a really good idea, but so is reverse mentoring, where you ask the more junior people in your organization, whether they're younger in age or younger in the professional industry or younger in your organization, or more junior within the organization, maybe they become your mentors. So that's a softer way rather than imposing this Gihan coin concept on them. So how do you tap into the skills of everybody? As I said, that KPMG survey says that that talent for a digitized future, more digitized future, is the #1 challenge that Australian CEOs say they're facing at the moment. So just to finish off, let me just mute everyone again. And as I said, like this whole idea of expecting the unexpected is just something that's going to be with us for a while. So as much as like part of my day job is to see what KPMG is saying, to see what's happening around the world, to look at how a vaccination program compares to global equity and vaccination, and to look at trends that are happening elsewhere, and then to bring that to you and show you what the future might look like. All of that's really valuable. And I hope so, because that's what keeps me in a job. But also, there's a lot of stuff in the future that nobody knows what's going to happen. And we're facing a lot of change and disruption, and we'll continue to face that. So be ready to continue expecting and embracing the unexpected. So if you'd like to work with me, a lot of people here know how you can. But if you can go to gihanspeaks.com, you can see my keynote, Disrupted, is the one that's most relevant to what we're talking about today. And you can go there and you can find out about keynote presentations that I run, in-depth masterclasses. I can give you a futurist lens to help you with your strategic planning. And I also have some leadership programs specifically for the leaders and within your organization at all levels, particularly people leaders. My last message, as I do in many of my presentations, is to say just don't wait for everything to be perfect. Don't wait for all your ducks to be lined up in a row, because the world won't wait for you. And 2020, 2021, of course, has taught us that. To start before you're ready, and that's the best way to be fit for the future. Thank you everyone for coming along. Thank you especially for participating. If you want to get in touch with me, all my contact details are at gihanperera.com. Love to have a conversation with you about this. In the meantime, stay safe and healthy. I'll see you in the future. See you everyone.